Meanwhile, Aram stood her ground against Urian's decree proposal, bluntly telling him she had zero intentions of getting cozy with Millard in any form of matrimonial venture. Surprisingly, Urian was rather chill about it. He thanked her for her honesty and graciously allowed her to make a swift exit. Taking a carriage straight to the palace, Aram couldn't help but fret over what the Duke might think of her sudden disappearance. Gathering her courage, she ventured to Millard's room, only to find him in a state of sheer desperation. He burst out of the door like a bat out of hell. Overwhelmed, Aram began pouring her heart out about the cabin ordeal, but in a moment of impulsivity, Millard kissed her. The unexpected lip lock left Aram dazed, and Millard, seizing the moment, scooped her up and brought her inside. Once inside the room, Aram spilled the beans about the head maid's shady role, urging Millard to fire her. However, in a classic boss move, Millard defended the head maid's job performance. Confused, Aram asked why he hadn't come to her rescue at the cabin. Millard, leaving her to connect the dots, closed the curtains for added dramatic flair and embarked on a long exposition. He explained the imperial family's plot to make him mortal through a human-vampire union. The catch? The imperial family had a murderous vendetta against his potential wives, and he couldn't just marry a vampire bride from the realm he ruled. Aram, wide-eyed, learned the shocking truth. Whoever became Millard's wife would have a target on their back from day one, and now, to complicate things further, the second prince had decided to play the sugar daddy card with Aram. Next thing she knew, he sent her a pair of shoes. And not just any shoes. Millard even took a mould of her feet to ensure a perfect fit. Now that's commitment. Aram, intrigued but cautious about Millard's potential reaction, stashed the shoes under her bed for safekeeping. However, when she ventured into Millard's room, bracing for the inevitable interrogation, he surprised her by not getting mad at all. Instead, he casually told her to use the gift and any other fabulous products she received. To up the ante in the gift war, Millard whisked Aram away to an upscale royal shoe shop. There, they encountered a snooty shopkeeper who initially refused to serve Aram, judging her by her maid uniform. Realizing it wasn't good for business, the shopkeeper eventually caved and showcased their shoe collection. Aram, with her simple tastes, aimed for practical shoes, but Millard had other plans, selecting a flashy pair for her. Just when Aram thought the gift saga was over, the second prince struck again, this time gifting her an apron. This time, Millard didn't reciprocate, sensing the escalating gift warfare. Concerned, Aram approached him, requesting he call off the prince. Despite his usual moody demeanor, Millard reluctantly agreed. To smooth things over, Aram decided to apologize with a personal touch. Flower power. She bought Millard some flowers and attached a heartfelt note about how much she appreciated his gifts. However, instead of receiving gratitude, she was met with cold dismissal. Confused by his abrupt reaction, Aram left the room, leaving Millard alone with his newfound flower fragrance obsession. Later that night, Aram woke up to find herself surrounded by a bizarre assortment of flowers, a weird midnight floral surprise, courtesy of the eccentric vampire duke. As she rushed out of her room, she was accused by an irate maid of breaking a glass vase. Aram, innocent as a kitten, protested, but the maid wasn't having it. With a sigh, Aram agreed to clean up the mess. Just another day in the vampire mansion. Undeterred, she made her way to Millard's dark and mysterious room, where the curtains were tightly drawn, blocking out any hope of daylight. While pouring hot water for Millard, she mustered the courage to express her gratitude for the gifts, though she hinted at the discomfort they brought her. Millard, seemingly understanding, promised to ease up on the extravagant gifting. Then came the strange request, the blue teapot. As Aram scoured the mansion for it, Millard dropped the bomb that it was poisoned. She was then tasked with another errand, this time to retrieve a box with a bead. Hoping for a less lethal assignment, Aram set out. In a cinematic flashback, Millard reminisced about creating the blue teapot himself. Because, as a vampire, he enjoyed the taste of poison, and being immortal, it didn't bother him. Just your average vampire with a weird palate. As Aram continued her search for the bead box, she crossed paths with the angry maid from earlier, who now accused her of snitching to the Duke. Baffled, Aram denied the allegations, but before she could protest further, the maid locked her out in the cold confines of the bathing area. Fortunately, a maid named Isabel came to Aram's rescue and escorted her back to her room. Isabel informed the Duke about the incident, and he was not pleased. Angry, he stormed to Aram's room to check on her. Millard, showing a surprisingly softer side, blanketed Aram in not one, not two, but 3 layers of warmth, practically turning her into a human marshmallow. Feeling like a mummy in a snowstorm, Aram bravely requested the removal of at least 1 layer. After a heated debate, Millard reluctantly agreed to peel off a blanket, revealing a slightly less bundled Aram. In a moment of rare seriousness, Millard apologized to Aram, promising to change his ways. He acknowledged that he hadn't been the most careful caretaker and that Aram's condition was proof of that. Just as things were starting to calm down, the Pope, the holy light enthusiast, made an entrance. Ordered by Millard to fix Aram, the Pope, with all his knowledge of her past life and emptiness, hesitated before applying his holy touch to her forehead. Millard, unimpressed, found the whole blessing affair annoying, and the Pope eventually made his exit. Curious about Millard's displeasure, Aram asked for an explanation, but he brushed her off, sending her back to sleep. Little did she know, Millard was about to unleash a fit of vampire rage on the entire servant crew. Gathering the terrified servants in the hall, Millard singled out the maid responsible for locking Aram in the bathing area. In a twisted display of vampire justice, he forced her to drink poison, and the poor maid spat blood like an extra in a horror movie. Satisfied with his dramatic execution, Millard left the servants with a stern warning: never touch his maid again. Later, Millard visited Aram and told her that he would be moving her to a new room because her current one was too far away. He modified several things in the palace for her comfort. When Aram woke up in her new, improved room, she marveled at the cozy surroundings. Even the vampire lord's room was conveniently close by, as if the entire mansion had undergone a magical makeover. The once jealous and mad maids now bowed to Aram's newfound authority, creating an oddly harmonious atmosphere. However, the mysterious disappearance of the troublemaking maids, including the one who had locked Aram in the bathing area, left an air of intrigue. Isabel, acting serious, ushered Aram to her room and spilled the tea about the fired maids. In a dramatic twist, she pleaded with Aram to keep Duke Millard in check, as he apparently only listened to her. Isabel also revealed Millard's ruthless act of punishing the head maid. With a sense of responsibility, Aram promised to look into it. Someone had to stop Millard's rampage, and why not with a bit of diplomacy? As Aram headed toward Millard's office, she overheard 2 maids discussing their reluctance to deal with the vampire lord, who was apparently acting like a monster. Vampire problems, right? Inside the office, Millard orchestrated a grand sit-down session, leaving Aram twiddling her thumbs for what felt like hours. Later that night, Millard called Aram outside his room and presented her with the D. But before your imagination runs wild, let me clarify. It was delicious chocolates. Aram graciously thanked the Duke, but something seemed off. Millard's face was downcast, leaving her in a state of perplexed, chocolatey confusion. Millard, feeling hunger creeping in, needed blood. The servants freaked out and hastily grabbed another girl to replace Rosa for Flora's usual blood-sucking routine. The poor substitute was terrified, and Aram, ever the peace ambassador, decided to step in and calm her down. But oh boy, the girl was crying like a broken faucet, which was getting on Aram's nerves. She briefly considered switching from a gentle approach to a slightly threatening one, warning the girl that if she didn't quiet down, the Duke might turn her into a human juice box. Surprisingly, the girl managed to force a shaky smile through her tears, and with a mental eye roll, Aram headed to the Duke's lair. On her way there, she couldn't help but feel like the new girl was a mini version of herself when she first landed in this peculiar palace. When she finally reached the Duke's office, Aram revealed the situation with the new recruit for Flora. The Duke, in all his blood-sucking glory, sauntered over to check on the girl. However, as he approached, he couldn't quite read Aram's expression. Confusion struck him like lightning, and he started getting anxious, worried that he had messed something up. Little did he know, Aram was just lost in thought, reminiscing about her first days in this bizarre vampire palace. As the Duke neared the sobbing girl, something inside him snapped, and he ended up squeezing her neck a bit too hard. Oops. Realization hit him, and he quickly stepped back, regret washing over his vampire conscience. Seeking redemption, he awkwardly asked the girl for suggestions on how to do something nice for Aram. Still sniffling, the girl rambled on about a raise or some cold hard cash. As she spoke, the Duke's super-sensitive vampire nose caught a whiff of blood outside the room. Aram, growing impatient, envisioned the worst-case scenario. Fueled by memories of her own entry into this strange palace, she pulled out a dagger, giving her finger a small cut for dramatic effect. Just as she was ready to storm in like a superhero, the Duke intercepted her. Realizing she thought he was turning the girl into a snack, his delicate vampire ego took a hit. Aram assured him it was just a déjà vu moment, and the Duke, looking slightly wounded, retreated into his lair. That night, like a mysterious nocturnal creature, Millard vanished into the forest without a word, probably to contemplate his vampiric existence. Or maybe just to have a dramatic brooding session under the moonlight, who knows. Vampires, right? You see, Millard, the Duke of Brooding, wasn't really a fanboy, but more like a lonely vampire with a serious case of the blues. His childhood was essentially a vampire version of being grounded forever. He spent his early days locked up in a room with nothing but books for company, practically earning himself a PhD in self-taught reading. Fast forward to adulthood, and Millard became a big-shot duke, but alas, loneliness was still his trusty sidekick. Then one day, his friend Logan spilled the beans about a vampire girl up for auction. Millard's eyes probably sparkled at the idea of finally having a fang buddy to share his woes, but when he snagged the girl, she turned out to be as human as a pizza delivery guy. Now, most people would have gone for the classic throat-ripping move, but not our Millard. Nope, he decided to keep her around and make her suffer just because... why not? However, as they shared a living space, her quirky personality started tugging at his lonely heartstrings. What started as an annoying presence slowly became amusing, and against all vampire odds, she brought a bit of happiness into Millard's undead existence. The next day, Aram strolled into her room, expecting to find Millard, but he was nowhere in sight. A whole week passed with still no sign of the elusive Duke. Aram couldn't help but notice that the other servants were carrying on with their chores as if the Duke's disappearance was just a minor blip on their radar. Puzzled, she lounged on her bed, wondering where on earth the Duke had vanished to and what kind of shenanigans he might be up to. Just as her thoughts were spiraling into a worry-fueled daydream, there was a knock on her door. Lo and behold, it was the Duke himself. Before Aram could even process his sudden appearance, Millard handed her... no, not that type of head. He presented her with the severed head of the slave trader who had captured her. Millard then casually informed her that he had single-handedly taken down the entire slave trader market and liberated her. Instead of jumping for joy, Aram was still processing the situation, her mind struggling to catch up. But Millard misread her expression, thinking she was disappointed. Instantly, he transformed into a full-blown nervous wreck, desperately asking how he could make her happy. His anxiety reached a peak, and in a dramatic fit, he even knelt before her, begging for forgiveness. Aram, completely taken aback by his theatrics, hurriedly pulled him up. But Millard wasn't done. He continued pleading, convinced she saw him as some kind of monster. As a final peace offering, he handed her a recommendation letter, perhaps thinking she wanted to escape his chaotic world. However, Aram waved off the idea, deciding she wasn't ready to leave just yet. Despite all the madness, she realized she wanted to stick around. The next morning, Millard dove into a mountain of letters like a paper-hungry detective on a mission. Aram, now promoted from garbage lady to chief name-cutter, stood by his side, dutifully assisting in the noble art of dustbin duty. As Millard sifted through the stack, he spotted a prestigious invitation from E. Miller. With a casual nod, he expertly tossed it into the not-interested pile. Enter Logan, the bearer of news and the harbinger of concerns, followed by the Pope, who made a grand entrance, fretting over Millard's apparent rejection of an invite from Emperor ECM. Shocked and slightly offended by Millard's nonchalant attitude, the Pope pleaded with him to at least attend the medal-awarding portion of the grand ceremony. Millard, with his usual disinterest, suggested FedEx delivery for the Emperor's medal. In disbelief, Pope informed Millard that the Emperor was so impressed by his slave trader eliminating prowess that he was offering him the second highest medal. Aram, sensing an opportunity, convinced Millard to at least consider attending. Later that night, Aram thanked Millard for liberating the slaves, sharing that it had reminded her of her own captivity. Millard, suddenly connecting the dots, realized that when Aram spoke of her first day in that world, she meant the day she had been captured by slavers. In a moment of delusional glory, Millard asked if Aram wanted to go back home. Aram, grounding him in reality, explained that returning home wasn't an option for her. Millard, misinterpreting her words, sighed in relief, convinced it was a sign of affection. With grand plans beginning to form in his mind, Millard decided to transform their current location into a new home for Aram. After all, why settle for saving the day when you could also redecorate the entire place? The next morning, Duke sat in his office, looking like a corporate slave burning the midnight oil. Aram, stationed comfortably on a couch, couldn't help but notice his pale demeanor. Being the inquisitive soul he was, Miller decided to dive into the mysteries of Aram's past life, asking about her academic endeavors. Aram revealed she was once a shining academic star with dreams of becoming a civil servant. Millard, looking like he'd just discovered a parallel universe, was shocked by her studious past and immediately began comparing her to the students in his world. In a flash of inspiration, or perhaps desperation, he summoned Julio Almas, the librarian advisor, to be Aram's academic mentor. Introductions were made, and Julio handed Aram a question paper so confusing even their translator couldn't make sense of it. The studying journey began in the afternoon, and Aram couldn't help but feel a bit out of her element. Meanwhile, in the maid mess, the head maid burst in with a grand announcement. A function was on the horizon, and all servants could pen down their requests for wages or bonuses. Cheers erupted from the staff, but, in a rare moment of worry, Aram realized she couldn't navigate the festivities alone. Off to Isabel she went, requesting her company for the upcoming shenanigans. A visit to Duke's office ensued, but Millard was deep in a bad mood. Aram, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in his corporate slave heart, shared her festival plans with Isabel, only to unintentionally exacerbate Millard's already grumpy state. The next day, with all servant requests completed, Millard made a dramatic exit from the palace. A curious servant asked Aram why she wasn't joining him for the parade. Baffled but eager for adventure, she decided to ditch the office and hit the festival with Isabel. At the lively festival, Aram went incognito, sporting a hat to keep her black locks and identity under wraps. The whole event was a chaotic whirlwind of excitement. Aram and Isabel, attempting to catch a glimpse of the parade, found themselves sandwiched in the crowd like a piece of meat between teeth. Aram's anxiety levels reached new heights, while Isabel, not exactly a beacon of empathy, yelled at her to toughen up. Meanwhile, at the Emperor's palace, Duke A. Miller encountered the formidable presence of Duke. However, Duke's mood wasn't exactly festive, as he brooded over the idea of Aram enjoying herself without him. Logan, ever the voice of reason, advised Duke against making a scene. Caught in a whirlwind of thoughts about a maid, Duke found himself tangled in emotions. Enter the femboy prince, ready to apologize but equally ready to stir the pot. Inquiring about Aram, Duke grumpily asserted that the prince had no business knowing about her. The prince, with a mischievous grin, tried his best to annoy Duke, who, in a state of confusion, turned on his heel and walked away. The prince, observing this, realized his plan to pique Duke's interest in Aram was working like a charm. Back at the function, as the parade finally kicked off, Duke found himself holding a leash with the head maid on the other end. The head maid became the center of attention for the parade, taking the spotlight while the crowd erupted in cheers, leaving Duke in the dust. Like being neglected by a crush. The parade itself was a dazzling spectacle, and the entire audience soaked up the enjoyment. Once the glitter settled, everyone returned to their usual festival shenanigans. On the way back, Aram couldn't help but inquire about the head maid's strange position with Duke. Isabel spilled the beans, revealing that she was initially Duke's chosen companion because, well, there wasn't anyone else around. Isabel clarified that sitting on a horse with a woman beside you symbolized obedience, and dropped the bomb that she was Duke's original pick. They took a breather at a fried chicken stall where Isabel casually suggested Aram could be the priestess in the parade. Aram, not feeling the whole horseback obedience vibe, questioned the term priestess. Isabel, in her typical straightforward style, recounted a scandalous tale of a viscount who accidentally brought his side piece instead of his fiancée to the parade. The woman on the horse became the equivalent of Saul if young and a priestess if old. Aram had missed the chance to be the youthful Saul equivalent. Opportunity knocked, but she didn't answer. Isabel then revealed that she was paid to be friendly to Aram and advised her to sing her praises in front of the Duke. They wrapped up the function with more enjoyment and headed back to the palace. Millar, returning and still fuming over his encounter with the prince, fretted about whether Aram cared about the medal he received. In a surprise twist, he decided to check on her in her room, only to be greeted by like it was his birthday surprise. The grumpy old grandpa Duke didn't seem impressed at all with Aram's excitement. He brushed off her enthusiasm, telling her not to force herself into these things. Aram, determined to make her point, retorted that she wasn't forcing herself, she genuinely wanted to do it. Sensing his displeasure, she quickly apologized and suggested she should leave. Just as she was about to make her exit, Duke halted her with a gruff voice, instructing her to light the candles and share the tales of her day. Reluctantly, they both settled down and Aram revealed every detail. As she narrated, Duke, in his own gruff way, asked if she had fun. She beamed and replied that it was awesome. Tons of fun. Suddenly, Duke sprang from his chair and fetched a sky lantern from another room. He suggested they send it together. They ascended to the terrace, lit it up, and watched it float into the night sky. Aram couldn't help but feel genuinely happy, and it dawned on Millard that, grumpy as he may be, he had managed to bring joy to her day. The next day, Duke surprised Aram with an invitation to the Emperor's birthday. However, apprehension set in as she worried about judgment at this royal event. Duke reassured her, but Aram still feared potential humiliation. Eventually, she agreed, only to realize the celebration was in 3 months, not enough time to master dance and etiquette. During a study session with her advisor, Aram told him about Duke's invitation. Desperate for guidance, she pressed the advisor, who bluntly admitted he couldn't do much. Undeterred, she insisted, and he reluctantly agreed to look into it. After their study session, the advisor spilled all the beans to Duke, who, in his typical grumpy fashion, declared that Aram thinks way too much. The advisor, trying to be helpful, suggested bringing in Ela for etiquette lessons, but that idea didn't sit well with Duke, who promptly told him to stay in his lane. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Nelson apologized, prompting Duke to warn him about the watchful eyes and the need to be more careful. Aram's next study session started a tad early, with a mission to prepare for the upcoming birthday bash. After completing a chapter, the advisor instructed Aram to head to a room on the 2nd floor, East Wing. As she explored, a lady named Evangeline and a nerdy-looking boy, Doran, introduced themselves. Apparently, Evangeline was there to teach Aram the palace waltz. They kicked things off with some knee-bending action and a bit of dancing. Once Evangeline left, another lady stepped in, ready to school Aram in palace etiquette. Come nighttime, Aram's back felt like she'd been in a gaming marathon for hours, tired and aching. She realized Duke wasn't exactly treating her like a pet, but more like a project. The next day, during the study session, the advisor lost his cool with Aram, convinced she'd ruined Duke's reputation at the birthday party. Word of this reached Duke, who summoned the advisor to his office. There, the grumpy Duke unleashed his rage, threatening the advisor for scolding Aram. Desperate to save face, the advisor pleaded that everything was for Duke's reputation. Unmoved, Duke sentenced the advisor to the dungeon, where he would await his punishment. Aram waltzed into the study session, expecting her usual advisor, only to find an empty chair. Puzzled, she headed to Duke's office to seek answers. Duke, with a guilty look, apologized on behalf of the missing advisor, admitting that he had been a bit too stern with her. However, Aram shrugged it off, claiming she could handle a verbal slap or two, since it was all out of concern. While they chatted, Pope made a grand entrance, and Duke's expression instantly plummeted. He promptly instructed Aram to play hostess and entertain Pope in the hall. As Aram approached Pope with the head maid, surprisingly all sugar and spice, expressed her delight at Aram getting cozy with Duke, believing it was softening him up. Aram, caught off guard by the sudden friendliness, just nodded along. Pope, on the other hand, unleashed his inner bargain bin counselor on Aram, asking about her feelings in the palace and dropping the bomb that he too suffered under the missing advisor. Pope attempted some budget therapy before the conversation got too absurd. Just as things were getting awkward, Duke swooped in and sent Aram off to rest. Ignoring Duke's advice, Aram sneakily headed to his office and stumbled upon a smuggling case report. Caught up in reading, she lost track of time. Suddenly, it hit her. It was waltz training time with Evangeline. Rushing to the session, she found herself learning a myriad of hand signals and even got a crash course in how to be intentionally rude. As the night dragged on, Aram, still wide awake, practiced her walking technique in her room. Duke happened to stroll by and spotted her. A grin spread across his face. Maybe the sight of her perfecting her walk was the unexpected highlight of his day. The next day, Duke decided to take Aram to a jewelry shop to flex his diamond knowledge. He showed her a bunch of sparkly rocks and asked her to spot the difference. But to his surprise, Aram couldn't play the spot the diamond game. While Duke disappeared into the back room with the owner, the shop lady popped up like a jack-in-the-box to greet Aram. Confused about the diamond dilemma, Aram asked the shop lady why all the rocks looked like long-lost twins. Turns out, some sneaky distributors had stolen their diamond grinding saw and sold it to the competition. The shop lady was stressing over the rival shop making competitive diamonds faster than a microwave popcorn bag pops. In the middle of this diamond drama, Duke strolled back in and he and Aram made a hasty exit. Outside, Duke, the high and mighty, surprisingly helped Aram onto the carriage. Aram raised an eyebrow, thinking it wasn't every day you see a Duke doubling as a personal chauffeur. But wait. Duke had an excuse ready. He claimed Aram was as fragile as a bubble and he didn't want her spraining an ankle. Smooth move, Duke, but Aram found it a bit odd. She didn't sign up for a Duke and a half. They reached a park, and Duke transformed into a casual stroller, pointing at flowers and whatever else caught his fancy. Unexpectedly, a guy named Damier rushed in, all apologies and drama. It turned out he owned the rival jewelry shop, and they had nabbed the saw-stealing scoundrel. Duke, instead of unleashing a wrathful storm, calmly listened to Damier's plea for a contract renewal. To Aram's surprise, Duke spared Damier and walked away, leaving the poor guy in shock. Aram, in her confusion, wondered if Duke's leniency was some strange consideration for her. The emotional roller coaster hit her, and before she knew it, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Duke, seeing the waterworks, got concerned. Little did he know, Aram was having a moment of realization. She'd successfully turned the mighty Duke into a character from a tear-jerker soap opera. The next morning marked the grand finale of Aram's dance preparations, and guess who decided to join the dance floor? None other than the Duke himself. To Aram's surprise, the Duke had some serious moves. It turns out he wasn't just good at ruling a kingdom, he could cha-cha like a champ. After a bit of twirling and spinning, they headed to the Duke's office. In his majestic office, the Duke handed Aram the task of playing Letter Ninja again, but amidst the cutting and snipping, the Duke couldn't help but wonder why Aram seemed as slender as a stick. His frustration bubbled up. He just wanted her to be happy, but her changed attitude had him scratching his head. Driven by a desperate desire to see Aram smile, the Duke abruptly stood up and left the office. He wanted her to be as hearty as a laugh track on a sitcom, not as frail as a dandelion in the wind. Later, Aram received a letter from the prince. An apology letter. The prince wanted to meet her after the birthday gala to propose something shiny and new. Duke, not thrilled about the prince's sudden interest, declared that Aram should handle the situation personally. At the gala, Duke and Aram hit the dance floor twirling like they were auditioning for a ballroom dancing reality show. But just as things were getting interesting, someone interrupted the Duke. While Duke was away, Aram decided to sip on some wine like a sophisticated lady. However, her elegance was short-lived as she started coughing and vomiting blood. The whole place gasped. Talk about stealing the spotlight at the party. In a whirlwind of drama, Duke swooped in like a superhero and caught Aram just as she dramatically pointed at the waiter, blaming him for the poisonous drink. Duke, not one for subtlety, charged at the waiter like a rhino on a mission, delivering a royal beatdown and calling in the cavalry to arrest the miscreant. Escorted to a room, Aram looked like she had 1 HP left, dangerously low on her life bar. Duke had a light bulb moment. He did a wrist-slicing maneuver and started rubbing his blood and Aram's together like some bizarre potion-making ritual. Lo and behold, it worked. Aram regained consciousness, probably questioning Duke's first aid methods. Relief washed over Duke when Aram forgave him for whatever shenanigans went down on their first day at the palace. Upon reaching the palace, Duke tucked Aram into her bed, playing the role of the perfect caretaker. The next morning, Aram woke up a tad bewildered to find Duke chilling by her bedside. He confessed he was worried she might have pulled a Sleeping Beauty, which made Aram feel oddly like royalty. With genuine concern, Duke explained that it reminded him of his childhood fear of his mum snoozing permanently. Cutting to the chase, Duke spilled the beans about the halfway point of the blood transfer. Furious, he confronted Pope, demanding to know why her blood wasn't purified entirely. The conversation quickly escalated into a heated debate about black blood, light, and all things vampire. Aram, caught in the crossfire, sat there utterly confused. Not one for subtlety, Duke turned to Aram, demanding if she was aware that vampire blood coursed through her veins. Pope, grinning like the Cheshire Cat, locked eyes with Aram, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. Aram then revealed a secret only the two of them were privy to. She spun a tale for Duke about getting smacked by a carriage, and Pope chimed in with the revelation that her body was a bit of an empty vessel. According to Pope, people could be categorized as either dark or light, but Aram defied such labels. She was like an empty soda can, fizz-free. Duke connected the dots, finally understanding why her hair was as dark as a moonless night, and why her blood had a taste that could put garlic-flavored toothpaste to shame. Realizing he was becoming expendable, Pope was politely shown the door by Duke, who probably needed some space for his brooding. With Pope out of the picture, Duke, in a moment of bossy concern, commanded Aram to take a horizontal position on the bed. However, Aram thought it was a bit beneath a Duke to be playing nursemaid. Duke, showing a surprisingly soft side, insisted he enjoyed their unique dynamic and wanted to take care of her. He even threw in an offer to go back to the way things were in the past, to which Aram, swift as a ninja, shot up from her bed, making it clear she had no interest in that retro nonsense. The next day, Duke embarked on a mission to unmask the villain behind Aram's carriage encounter. The waiter spilled the beans. It was none other than Ian Frayner. In a powwow with Logan, Duke decided they'd relocate right after the birthday gala. Meanwhile, Aram, casually reading the newspaper, nearly choked on her coffee when she stumbled upon paparazzi headlines about her and Duke being the hottest gossip in town. Pope, like a persistent salesperson, tried to convince Duke to postpone his return to the estate until the Advent. Duke, not buying what Pope was selling, shut him down. suspecting Pope's sudden concern had more to do with the fear of being shunned than anything else. Aram, with a diplomatic touch, assured Duke it was okay if it was about him. That night, in a move that could be misconstrued, Duke summoned Aram to his room. However, it wasn't a steamy rendezvous, but a delivery. A page revealing that Ian Frayner had been caught with a forbidden book and was due for a date with the Emperor and the Council.